Fund manager Valkyrie is launching the second Bitcoin futures ETF in the United States, making its trading debut under the ticker BTFD on the Nasdaq this morning. Joining us now to discuss is Leah Wald, CEO of Valkyrie. Good morning, Leah. Great to have you on the show. So congratulations. This is a very incredible achievement. I wonder, going into the U.S. market, we have ProShares, Bitcoin, another Bitcoin futures ETF on the market. What differentiates you from the competition?
Sure. And Christine, thank you so much for having me. Everybody else, thank you. We're definitely excited. So thanks for having me on the show. I think it's a great question. And I'd say it maybe is summed up by my shirt today that you probably all know. I think that other asset managers are in the ETF business and we're embedded in the crypto markets. I mean, at the end of the day, investors can choose whether they want subject matter expertise and the ability to pivot as needed, or again, they can go with a monolith that cares more about launching their next fund than this beautiful asset class that we love and care about. I mean, subject matter expertise is very important. We have it, and I think that ProShares actually doesn't. I'd be surprised if they knew a miner from an oracle. So, again, I think crypto investors do care about, more than how you dress, and you'll never catch any of us wearing cufflinks, and we care about Bitcoin and always will.
I take offense to that, by the way. I have a cufflink.
Oh, I apologize.
How dare you? How dare you?
I would have a hard time with cufflinks, but they look very nice on you.
No cufflinks here, yeah. Leah, congratulations on this great achievement. So I have a couple questions, actually, just about all this controversy about Bitcoin spot versus Bitcoin futures. So first of all, as we know, regulators have been very nervous about a Bitcoin spot ETF, and they feel that a Bitcoin futures ETF is somewhat safer, even though the concerns are about the underlying price of Bitcoin and about volatility and market manipulation. Can you break down for our viewers why a Bitcoin futures is actually a safer investment?
Sure. And to note, we filed our spot Bitcoin ETF back in January 22nd. So, we do find that to be the holy grail and are excited when that time comes. To your greater point, the SEC absolutely has clearly signaled a preference for futures ETFs versus a spot fund. We think that this is likely due to, again, futures already being traded on the CME and being a regulated product. So it's easier to put an already regulated product into a regulated ETF wrapper, right, than it is to take right now an unregulated product and put it into a regulated wrapper. So, we're optimistic about how this transitions, but we are excited about this current product as well.
Right, but I guess the question is why is it a safer product? Like, why does it protect investors more than just buying Bitcoin spot ETF?
I gotcha. Yeah, sure. So the ETF is really meant for anyone who wants exposure to the potential upside of Bitcoin, and without having to worry about the risks, including trading on what if they don't know if it's a regulated or unregulated platform, custodying the assets themselves, potentially losing wallet keys, or simply, again, just wanting to gain exposure to a rapidly growing asset class in their retirement funds. So that's easier with an ETF. I think that, you have a breakdown here on CoinDesk. A lot of us are very comfortable with, custodying our own keys, but that's not the case for everybody. So I'd say security and ease and the ability, again, for this very comfortable vehicle that a lot of traditional asset managers have been comfortable with for a while to allocate to various 401ks, retirement accounts, IRAs, is really the big reason behind a ETF's importance.
So just back to the spot versus futures question, there definitely has been some criticism of futures ETFs in that investors could actually, over the long term, end up losing money. One of the reasons for this is contango, which I think I generally understand, which is the idea that these contracts expire and you could end up buying the later contract at a higher price, right? So I mean, given that it is relatively easy to buy Bitcoin on the spot market, like it's not like oil or something, you could actually go and buy Bitcoin relatively easily. How much of a concern is this loss to investors that could happen via the Bitcoin futures ETF?
Sure. I think that that's a good question too. I don't think it's too much of a concern, but obviously it's something we are very much looking into. A lot of investors are worried about those high roll costs. The question is how to address them. The way that we're addressing them is we do plan, to your point, of rolling into next month's futures contracts as efficiently as possible. And we do believe that actually our team's deep expertise in the markets gives us an edge over those other offerings. Could people buy Bitcoin directly? Absolutely. They absolutely could. Is there concerns around 40 Act Bitcoin futures wrapper? Absolutely. And I think that, again, this is our first step and first foray into an ETF product. And, I think that there's going to be more to come, potentially spot next year. But I do think that this is a really good sterling product, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Leah, good to have you on. Cufflinks comment aside, but how much of the ETF is going into the actual futures versus let's say Treasuries, and how are you dividing the purchases? Obviously, the October expiry is coming up real soon, so you're just going straight to November and so on, or how are you dividing it?
Yeah. So you're right. Our portfolio is specifically Bitcoin futures. With that, you're absolutely correct that does include Treasuries, corporate bonds, and cash. But we're not investing in, let's say, the Canadian Bitcoin ETFs or GBTC, et cetera. So that allocation is, controlled by our brilliant CIO, Stephen McClurg, and everything is managed accordingly.
So, but do you have the percentage breakdown that would go into Treasuries versus futures? How much is it going to really track the futures?
Sure. So there is always tracking error. That's correct in this type of product. As for the percentage breakdown, that's on the prospectus. And there are specific limits that must be met for a 40 Act product. So I hope that answers your question.
And is this also going to be cash created and redeemed, or is it asset delivered? Like what's the actual structure going to be? Because what we have with the Pro shares, there was basically cash created, and there might have been some aspects of that made at least some of the volume look a little bit higher on the CME the first couple of days going out. But do we know, is this going to be delivered, or assets going to be delivered by the APs to receive the shares, or is it going to be just cash?
Sure. So we're the same, very similar structure to Pro shares, and utilizing just those CME futures for now.
Okay. You mentioned your T-shirt. It's the subreddit for Bitcoin. So you're deep into the Bitcoin community, but I wonder, does that mean you're staying away from ETFs in ETH or other altcoins?
For right now, we're very focused on our Bitcoin ETF suite. We have a couple others filed with the SEC at the moment as well. So we plan on really building up our ETF shop, and we have a lot more up our sleeve. All Bitcoin thematic for now.
Do you have a comment on, the status of crypto in the United States? Is it a little slow, or, going according to what you would perceive as a reasonable pace compared to the rest of the world?
In regards to crypto regulations, I assume. I think, is that your question, Christine?
Sure. Crypto adoption, crypto regulation, acceptance of the technology. Sure.
I think regarding adoption, I think it's going quite fast. I actually am very excited. I think that the adoption curve is going as well as we could expect for the fact that we're still early. It's still young. In regards to regulations, I think that regulators are very much trying to understand this asset class right now. And I think that the ETF is a great first step by the SEC. And I think that we will see more regulations in the future. And I think that a lot of them will be positive rather than negative for the crypto industry, especially if we think from a long-term view.
Yeah, just a larger markets question, but I think you'd be well placed to answer it because you actually understand the structure of ETFs. So since the first futures ETF was announced, we've seen the price skyrocketing, and the correlation is pretty clear. So I guess the question is, how much of this price rise is due to just like sentiment and narrative and people being like, okay, Bitcoin's here to stay, this is great, we're going to buy, and how much of it actually is linked to the actual futures ETF? Because obviously the futures ETF isn't buying Bitcoin itself, but there is some linkage between like futures buying and spot buying. I was wondering if you could just break down what you think is driving up the current price rise.
Yeah, we think that it's actually very healthy. And especially, right, we just hit all-time highs. We think that all signs are pointing higher. I think it's not just the capital flows within the ETF ecosystem, but I do truly think that a lot of the capital that was waiting on the side, the pools of wealth that were waiting to get in, are now starting to dip their toes with the ETF. I think that it's not just going to happen overnight, despite the meteoric, rise of BITO. I think that this is something that we need to watch for the next weeks and months and see how capital allocation from wealth managers, sovereign wealth funds, pensions, as we saw yesterday, and also from insurance starts to enter the market now that the vehicles that they're more comfortable with are now available to them.